Before the first coin was struck, before the first bank was built, before the first debt was written down, there was a handful of clay. And on that clay, someone pressed the end of a reed into wet mud. 4,300 years later, we call what they made money. But this is not a story about metal coins jingling in a purse. This is a story about an idea. An idea so powerful that it reshaped human society, created the first cities, and gave birth to writing itself. An idea that, whether you realize it or not, governs your life from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to sleep. Money was not invented in a royal mint. It was invented in mud brick temples, by priests counting grain. And the revolution they set in motion has never stopped. To understand what Mesopotamia invented, we have to understand what they were working with. By 3500 BCE, the first cities had risen along the rivers of what is now southern Iraq. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, tens of thousands of people living together who did not know each other. And that is the problem that money solved. Before money, there was barter. But the old story, the one you learned in school, that barter was hopelessly inefficient and money simply replaced it, that story is mostly wrong. What actually happened is far more interesting. The first economies were not market economies. They were temple economies. The temple was the landowner, the employer, the granary, and the treasury all at once. Tens of thousands of workers received rations, barley, oil, wool, beer. And the temple needed to track every single silo of grain it distributed. Think about that for a moment. This was a society without money, without markets, without shops on every corner. The temple was the engine of the entire economy. If you worked, the temple paid you. If you were hungry, the temple fed you. If the temple granaries ran dry, the city starved. So they invented writing. This is the fundamental fact that most people miss. Writing was invented for accounting. The earliest texts we have from Mesopotamia are not poetry, not prayers, not laws. They are ledgers. Lists of grain. Records of livestock. Accounts payable. Writing and money were born from the same impulse, the need to track value across time and distance. And once you could write down what someone owed, you had invented something far more powerful than simple trade. You had invented credit. A loan contract from ancient Mesopotamia was a physical object. A lump of clay, inscribed with cuneiform, signed with a cylinder seal, baked hard in the sun or a kiln. It could be broken open in court as evidence. It could be stored in a family archive for generations. It could be passed from one creditor to another, transferring the debt like a modern bond. These were the first financial instruments. And they were indestructible. We have thousands of them. Barley was the first money. It fed people, it stored value, everyone understood it. But barley has a problem. It spoils. It is heavy. You cannot carry a year's wages across the desert in a sack of grain. And when the harvest failed, there was no barley to use as money at all. So the Mesopotamians turned to silver. Silver had been valued for millennia as ornament, but the Mesopotamians did something new. They began to denominate value in silver. A sheep was worth a certain amount of silver. A day of labor was worth a certain amount of silver. The silver itself rarely moved, it was the unit of account, the abstract measure against which everything else was priced. They called the standard unit a siklu. We call it the shekel. 1 shekel of silver, roughly 8 grams, about the weight of $2 coins, was worth about 300 liters of barley. 1 mina was 60 shekels. 1 talent was 60 minas, roughly 30 kilograms of silver. A talent was enough to buy a house. A shekel could feed a family for a month. These were not arbitrary numbers, they were carefully calibrated to the real economy. The Mesopotamians understood something that some modern economists still struggle with: money only works if its units map meaningfully onto the things people actually need. This system of weights and measures, invented in the bazaars and temples of ancient Sumer, is the direct ancestor of every currency you have used today. Every time you check a price, you are standing on the shoulders of Babylonian merchants. Here is where it gets extraordinary. We have found thousands of clay tablets from Assyrian merchant colonies around 1900 BCE. They record hundreds of transactions where silver was debited and credited in accounts, but almost no silver actually moved. One tablet in Assur says a man paid for copper in Karnish. Another tablet in Karnish shows the same transaction recorded. The accounts balance. This is banking. This is credit. This is money as an abstract system of obligation, and it is happening 3,900 years ago. If the merchants were the customers, the temples were the banks. The temple of Shamash, the sun god, god of justice, was also the treasury. Silver, grain, wool, and metal were deposited in temple vaults. Loans were issued. Interest was charged. They called interest hubulu in Sumerian, and they had firm expectations for it. Interest on silver was typically 20% per year. On barley, it was 33%. This difference makes economic sense. Barley spoils, so lenders demanded a higher return. But it also tells us something uncomfortable. The poor, who borrowed in barley because that was what they ate, paid a much higher rate than the wealthy, who borrowed in silver. The temple did more than lend money. It held deposits in accounts. Payments could be made by instructing the temple to transfer silver from one account to another. No physical coins. No metal changing hands. Just a scribe updating a clay record. We have thousands of these loan contracts. They are remarkably standardized. The borrower's name. The lender's name. The amount. The interest rate. The date. A list of witnesses. And at the bottom, the impression of each party's cylinder seal, the legally binding signature of the ancient world. They also had partnership contracts, taputu, for commercial ventures. They had forward contracts agreeing to deliver goods at set prices in the future. They had guarantees and sureties. They had everything we think of as modern finance, just written in wet clay. When we think of Hammurabi's code, we think of an eye for an eye. But the stele, this 7-foot monument of black diorite, is something else first. It is an economic constitution. Of its 282 laws, nearly 40 directly regulate debt, interest, wages, prices, and commerce. Law 89, if a lender charges more than 20% interest on silver, he forfeits the loan. Law 117, a debtor who sells his family into bondage to cover a debt must be freed after 3 years. Law 48, if a storm destroys a farmer's crop, his debt is forgiven for that year. The code required written contracts for loans above a certain threshold. It established liability for losses in transit. It regulated the wages of laborers, builders, boatmen, and ox drivers. It did not create a free market, it created a regulated market, because the alternative was collapse. And collapse was always the threat. Mesopotamian kings had a remarkable tool. Periodically, a new king would declare a Mieroop, a justice edict that cancelled rural debts, released debt slaves, and returned land to original owners. The first recorded example is from King Emetina of Lagash, around 2400 BCE. This was not charity. It was economic policy. When debt concentration became too severe, it threatened the stability of the realm. The crown wiped the slate clean to prevent revolution. It is the direct ancestor of bankruptcy law, of debt relief programs, and of the biblical jubilee, the idea that every 50th year, debts are forgiven and slaves are set free. The shekel survives. It is the currency of modern Israel. But the legacy of Mesopotamian money is far deeper than a name. Every time you use a bank account, you are drawing on a system invented in the temples of Sumer. Every time you sign a loan agreement, you are following a structure perfected in the bazaars of Babylon. Every time a government forgives debt or passes bankruptcy legislation, it is echoing the Mieroop edicts of kings who ruled for 1,000 years ago. The conceptual framework of money was fully formed in Mesopotamia. Unit of account. Store of value. Medium of exchange. Credit. Debt. Interest. Banking. Financial contracts. All of it, present in the mud brick cities of the Tigris and Euphrates, centuries before the first coin. But here is the sobering truth. The problem Mesopotamia faced, the concentration of debt, the gap between the silver-rich and the barley-poor, the periodic crisis that required a king to step in and reset the system, that problem has never been solved. We have simply built more sophisticated tools for grappling with it. We invented writing to track money. We invented banks to store it. We invented contracts to promise it. We invented law to regulate it. And we invented forgiveness when it broke us. The clay tablets are in museums now. But the system they recorded? You carry it in your pocket. Every single day. Script end. ~2 300 words. Approx. 22 minutes spoken.